Some boats weren't just built, they were built to last forever. Most wooden hulls have vanished, most fiberglass cruisers have cracked, but here's the kicker. These 15 rare boats refused to die, lasting almost a century, outlasting storms, fashion trends, and even the companies that built them. Some were so exclusive you can count the hull numbers on one hand, drawing crowds in every marina they dock. Each one is a survivor, a masterpiece of design and grit, proving that true craftsmanship never fades. The Owens 24-foot cabin cruiser of 1967 was never flashy, but it was solid. Built during an era when American families were starting to see boating as a weekend lifestyle, it gave you just enough space to feel adventurous without overwhelming your driveway. Owens had a reputation for sturdy construction, which explains why examples are still kicking around nearly 60 years later. Owners often joke that you could run one aground, scrape the paint, and still make it home in time for Sunday dinner. Fiberglass was becoming standard by the late 60s, and Owens made the most of it. The hulls were tough, the layouts were practical, and the styling had just enough chrome to feel stylish without veering into kitsch. Plenty of cruisers from this era ended up rotting in yards, but Owens boats always seemed to find someone willing to fix them. Ask around a marina and you'll hear stories of families sleeping four tight in the cabin, arguing over who got the tiny galley. That's part of their legacy. Durable, reliable, and loved enough to last. And here's the thing, the list only gets rarer from here. Stick around till number 15, it'll blow your mind. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your favorite classic. If rarity is the true currency of classic boating, then the Matthews Martinique Express 42 might as well be gold bullion. Only 7 of these were ever built, making them almost mythical. Spotting one today is like seeing a unicorn quietly idling at a marina. Big, sleek, and unapologetically luxurious, they were the kind of boat you bought if you wanted people to know you had arrived. The Martinique was built at a time when Matthews was experimenting with blending timeless craftsmanship and a more modern profile. Think rich mahogany inside, fiberglass outside, and a layout that made weekends on the water feel more like staying at a lakefront lodge. Few brands managed to balance style and function quite like Matthews. Why so few survive? Simple. Not many existed to begin with, and those that did were pampered like vintage cars. Families passed them down, polishing every rail and rewiring every switch. Owning one today is like having a piece of boating's endangered species list sitting at your dock. Built in the 1960s by the legendary Merritt family in Florida, the 43-foot Sportfisher wasn't just a boat, it was a revolution. With only about a dozen hulls ever made, each was practically a custom job. Sport fishing wasn't supposed to look this stylish, but Merritt proved you could chase marlin and still look like royalty doing it. Anglers swear by these boats because they weren't just strong, they were clever. Wide beams, graceful lines, and an ability to handle rough seas with a smile made them instant favorites. If you see one today, chances are it has been restored better than new, with outriggers polished to a mirror finish. Owners treat them like prized thoroughbreds, ready to run, but never far from the stable. One fisherman once joked that owning a Merritt is like owning a Rolex you actually take diving. They were built for serious work, but they radiated elegance. That balance of utility and beauty is why so many are still lovingly afloat. Just so you know, the story only gets better from here. Some of the next boats were built in such tiny numbers and yet still survive today. Keep watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite. Back in the 1920s, when Manhattan's wealthy didn't want to sit in traffic, they relied on boats like the Craft 38 Commuter. These were aquatic limousines with long decks and seating for the whole family. Imagine flapper dresses and pinstripe suits boarding for a stylish ride down the Hudson. It was less about transport and more about making an entrance. Chris-Craft built these with dazzling mahogany hulls and fittings that gleamed like jewelry. They weren't just dependable, they were status symbols. Every detail was meant to tell the world you had arrived, literally. Owning one was like driving a Packard, but on water. Because they were loved and cared for, many survived into the modern day. You'll still see them at antique boat shows, polished so well you could check your hair in the reflection. They prove that even commuting can be glamorous if you have the right boat. Canada's answer to the American classics was the Shepherd 33, and it came with plenty of charm. Over 30 feet long, it was more than just a runabout, it was a party platform. Families piled on, friends squeezed in, and suddenly the lake became your living room. Owners often compare them to a polite moose, big, steady, and surprisingly graceful on rougher water. That mix of sturdiness and elegance is why so many still survive. Shepherds didn't rattle or complain, even when the waves did their worst. They just carried on like good Canadians. Because they weren't churned out in thousands, each boat feels personal. Many were passed down through generations, lovingly restored plank by plank. At boat shows today, a Shepherd 33 draws admiration like a vintage car, complete with crowds craning their necks for one more look. Elco had already made its mark with electric launches in the early 1900s, but by the 1930s, the company shifted gears. The 38 Fast Cruiser was their answer to a new era of boating. Sleek, seaworthy, and capable of covering real distance at a time when many boats shook apart if pushed too hard. It was a revelation for a world just getting comfortable with motorized leisure. Families could cruise farther, faster, and still arrive looking stylish. Owning one wasn't about joining the crowd, it was about standing apart. These boats were never cranked out in thousands, so each carried a sense of exclusivity. Having a fast cruiser meant you'd invested in both speed and elegance. Some even pulled double duty during wartime, proving they weren't just showpieces. They could take a beating and still come back for more, which is why a handful continue to survive. When one glides into a marina today, it feels cinematic, like a black and white reel brought to life. The long bow, curved cabin roof, and clean detailing capture an age when boats were built to endure and built to impress. Maine's Gaudin Stevens never made boats for the masses, and that's the point. Their 1959 flybridge cruiser was a handmade slice of New England craftsmanship, sturdy and dependable. The raised flybridge was forward-thinking for its time, offering a breezy perch for sunny afternoons. These cruisers weren't flashy, but they were versatile. One weekend they might haul traps, the next they'd host cocktails. Owners described them as more like partners than possessions, boats you could trust no matter the job. That's a big reason so many endured long past their expected years. Because only a handful were built, spotting one now feels like stumbling on a vintage diner still serving homemade pie. They're rare, practical, and full of quiet charm. In the right hands, a Gaudin Stevens flybridge still feels alive decades later. The Wicks brothers were never giants in the boat world, but their 1931 cruiser has the kind of underdog charm that collectors love. Built in Illinois, these were carefully handcrafted boats, often made in tiny numbers. That scarcity makes the few survivors especially treasured today. They look like floating antique furniture, squared cabins, neat trim, and the kind of craftsmanship that only comes from small shops. Owners often compare them to heirlooms, because you don't just keep a Wicks cruiser, you preserve it. Spotting one now is like finding a forgotten jazz record in pristine condition. It may not be as famous as a Chris-Craft, but it has soul, and the people who own them speak about them with affection that goes well beyond machinery. Oh boy, we're only just getting started. The final stretch includes boats so unique that most people have never even heard of them. Stay tuned, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rarest ones. Not every great boat needed to be a giant, and the 18-foot Scotty Craft Express proved it. Small, spirited, and endlessly fun, it was the scrappy underdog of the 1950s boating scene. While the big names dominated brochures and boat shows, Scotty Craft quietly built its reputation by producing stylish, durable runabouts in small batches. That scarcity is part of why each surviving example feels so special today. Owners adored them for their quick, playful handling. This was the kind of boat you could hitch to the family car on a Friday night, drop into the lake on Saturday morning, and spend the whole weekend pulling skiers or darting across open water. People joked it was their summer sports car. Nimble enough to thrill, but tough enough to take the knocks that came with family fun. Because they were never mass-produced, every Scotty Craft that survives today carries its own personal story. They lasted not because they were pampered showpieces, but because they were practical, well-built, and loved. Collectors still light up when they find one, proof that even the smallest boat can leave the biggest impressions. When Chris Craft introduced the Sea Skiff in the late 1950s, they weren't chasing millionaires or yachting clubs. They were aiming straight at families who wanted a boat that simply worked. Built with lapstrake planking, a method borrowed from Viking ship builders, the hulls were lighter, stronger, and more flexible than most competitors. That clever construction gave them a stubborn durability, and plenty are still afloat to prove it. Families loved the Sea Skiff because it could wear many hats. One weekend it was the fishing boat, the next it became the family cruiser, and by Sunday evening it could be polished just enough to look sharp at the marina. Some models even squeezed in bunks, challenging families of four to see just how much togetherness they could really endure. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and that's exactly what people needed. The Sea Skiff built its legacy by refusing to quit. Owners still boast about decades of service with only modest upkeep. It's a classic reminder that practicality often outlives flash, and that's why the Sea Skiff remains a cherished part of boating history. The Commander 36 was Chris Craft's fiberglass breakthrough, a boat that proved plastic didn't have to mean flimsy. Introduced in the 1960s, it combined modern durability with the classic looks that made the brand famous. Some say it was like moving from a wood cabin to a brick house, sturdier, but just as inviting. It had a purposeful design with a hull that handled coastal waters gracefully. Families used them for long weekends, often stuffing kids into bunks better suited for luggage. The Commander wasn't just reliable, it made boating accessible to a new wave of owners who wanted both strength and style. Unlike many early fiberglass boats, the Commander 36 aged well. Dozens are still running, many restored with modern upgrades, but still carrying that 60s soul. It wasn't just a survivor, it was a pioneer. The Blue Star 38 never chased fame, but its rarity makes it special. Built in limited numbers, it offered a middle ground between elegance and practicality. With its clean lines, roomy cabin, and understated wood trim, it was a quiet achiever in a noisy market. Owners often describe it as the Volvo of boats, dependable, safe, and subtly stylish. It wasn't about flash, it was about getting the family on the water without constant headaches. Marinas appreciated them too, because they didn't fall apart under pressure. Today, the Blue Star 38 is a hidden gem. Collectors prize it not because it was ever a headline act, but because it represents a forgotten piece of boating history. Spotting one is like finding a rare buck that somehow survived a library fire, unexpected and deeply rewarding. The Century Coronado was sold as the Cadillac of boats, and it delivered on the promise. With its sweeping windshield, chrome accents, and tail fin-inspired design, it looked more at home in a car showroom than a marina. Introduced in 1955, it was bold, glamorous, and unforgettable. Unlike many flashy boats, the Coronado balanced looks with quality. Owners treated them like convertibles, fun to show off, but carefully maintained so they'd last. That devotion explains why so many have survived in pristine condition, still dazzling crowds at boat shows today. They weren't built in huge numbers, and that's part of their mystique. Restored examples shine like mid-century Americana on the water. Few boats capture the spirit of their era as perfectly as the Coronado. Glamour married to craftsmanship with just the right touch of chrome. And there you have it, 15 rare boats that prove true craftsmanship doesn't fade with time. These aren't just floating machines, they're survivors, each carrying stories of families, builders, and generations that kept them alive. Some were built in numbers you can count on one hand, others became icons of elegance and durability, but all share one thing: they're still here. If you enjoy this journey through boating history, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more timeless stories, and let us know in the comments which of these classics stole your heart. The 1925 Slipper launch feels like it belongs in an Agatha Christie novel, gently cruising the Thames while gentlemen in straw hats sip gin. Sleek and understated, these launches earned their name from their slipper-like profile, sliding along the water with barely a ripple. They weren't built for speed or show, but for quiet elegance, and that's what has kept them alive for a century. Maintaining one is like owning a classic teapot. Delicate, fussy, but strangely rewarding. Most were built in tiny numbers, often by small riverside workshops. Some families treated them as floating drawing rooms, complete with polished brass and wicker chairs. To this day, you'll spot them at regattas, gliding past modern yachts with an air of superiority, as if to say, "I was here first." They may not roar like a speedboat, but slipper launches have something better: character. Their long lives prove that endurance isn't always about power. Sometimes it's about grace, charm, and a good coat of varnish. The 1950s Hackercraft Runabout wasn't just a boat, it was a floating sculpture in varnished mahogany. Imagine the sunlight bouncing off those glossy planks as you glide across a lake. People didn't just turn their heads, they stopped conversations mid-sentence to watch one pass by. Hackercrafts were never built cheap or in bulk, which is exactly why so many still exist today. Owners joke that the wood finish requires more polishing than a politician's speech, but the payoff is eternal glamour. Boats like these weren't tossed aside once fiberglass became popular, because you simply couldn't abandon something that beautiful. Instead, families maintained them with the same care you'd give a family heirloom. Plenty of classics have vanished, but the Hackercraft's survival is a story of obsession. Clubs still gather just to show off the mirror-like decks and hear that low, rumbling inboard engine. It is living proof that a boat can outlast decades of trends if it's crafted with enough love and mahogany.